Hello, I'm Oliver Colling, and this is my 70s TV childhood. Hello, and welcome back to My 70s TV Childhood, the podcast where we celebrate growing up in 1970s Britain and the part that television played in our childhood. Thanks for all of your positive feedback on the series to date. I do appreciate hearing your memories and comments, and it's great that so many of you enjoy being taken back to a simpler time, where our everyday lives were enlivened by television, which proved an exciting contrast to what was a difficult time in our nation's history. Special thanks goes to our listeners Linda and Eric from Bailiff Bridge in West Yorkshire, who've signed up as supporters of the show at our Patreon site. Thanks to you both for your valuable contribution, and really glad you're enjoying the show. Join in the conversation at www.my70stvchildhood.com, tweet me at 70stvchildhood, or email me, oliver@my70stvchildhood.com. Today, we're looking at sport and how it played a part in my 70s TV childhood. I'm recording this episode at a time when public movement is limited and sport is in crisis. Crowds have not yet been allowed back to support professional sport, and whilst elite sport is still taking place, there are serious doubts on the financial viability of some sports. As a TV viewer, I can still watch lots of sport from the comfort of my armchair. It's now in high definition with dozens of camera angles and lots of, well, perhaps sometimes too much, high-quality insight and punditry. It wasn't like that in the 1970s. Like so many things, sports TV coverage was simpler, but still could be very effective and powerful. I've mentioned before that my lifetime obsession with sport began in the 1970s, when, at a fairly young age, I started to take an interest. My parents had no interest in sport, even though my paternal grandfather had been a keen and very successful amateur footballer and cricketer. My father had missed out on the sporting gene, and his adult experience of competitive sport was when, despite having no knowledge of the game, he was sent to umpire a hockey match whilst he was an officer in the RAF doing his national service. What the team thought of his officiating has not been recorded, but fortunately, the gene did skip a generation to me and to my sister, who were both very keen sports followers. My first interest was in football. Living in Warrington, which is equidistant from Liverpool and Manchester, the influence of the big Manchester and Liverpool clubs was ever present. I don't remember when I decided to follow Manchester United, or why, but most of my schoolmates supported one of the big four Northwest clubs. And in my early years at primary school, it became essential to have a duffel bag showing which team you supported. I begged my mother for a Manchester United duffel bag for weeks, and then one day she brought one home from Warrington Market, much to my delight. Like many other small children, I quickly became obsessed with the game, reading match reports, cutting out pictures from the paper, and I began collecting Panini football stickers and Topps bubblegum cards, even though I didn't really like bubblegum. My first Panini album was Euro Football, issued in 1977, which was unusual as it wasn't linked to a particular tournament. But that set me off on a hobby which, I confess, I still pursue. I still have the Euro Football album, and have collected the stickers for every World Cup since 1978, although I now don't have to save up my pocket money in order to buy a single packet, and prefer to purchase stickers by the box, which contains 100 packets. I also find it a bit harder to find anybody to do swaps with. unlike the playground in the 1970s, where swapping was a part of every break time. The first Football World Cup I fully appreciated was Argentina in 1978. The tournament was exciting, not least by the performance of the hosts, who entered giant stadiums to huge ticker-tape showers and then swept all before them to win the cup. England didn't qualify for that tournament, so British hopes were with Scotland, who entertained serious ambitions of doing very well. There was even a hit song by Andy Cameron, Ali's Tartan Army, which got to number 6 in the charts. We're on the march, we Ali's Army. We're all going the Argentine. And we'll really shake 'em up when we win the World Cup, because Scotland is the greatest football team. I remember at primary school, several of my classmates wore Scotland strips for football practice, something you can't imagine happening today. But the euphoria was short-lived, as Peru beat Scotland 3-1 in the opener, and, in an even worse performance, they drew 1-1 with Iran in the next game. Some pride was restored by a famous victory against the Netherlands, including Archie Gemmore's wonder goal, later memorably used in the film Trainspotting, but Scotland limped home defeated. As well as football, I quickly grew to love cricket. Vast acres of otherwise empty scheduling on BBC One and BBC Two was given over to the game. Not only did we have coverage showing every ball of every test match and one-day international, we also had extensive coverage of domestic cricket, including the John Player League, a limited-over Sunday tournament. Cricket was a very different game then. Players were very poorly paid, not always very athletic, but very exciting nonetheless. Commentators like Jim Laker, Richie Benno, and the amiable Peter West were a comforting, relaxing presence on our screens. Incidentally, many years later, I once stopped to help Peter West when his car had broken down, and he was extremely grateful and appeared to be a lovely man. And I'm delighted to welcome our guest for today, and I've got Ross from Kingston on the line. Hello, Ross.
Hello, Oliver. Good to be here.
Thanks ever so much for joining us on My 70s TV Childhood.
It's really great. I've been listening to other podcasts in the series, and I'm very honoured to be invited to be on this particular episode. So thanks very much.
Oh, a pleasure. Really good to have you here. What was it like for you growing up as a child in the 1970s?
I was born in Liverpool, then to Manchester, then to Exeter, and then to where I eventually stopped for most of my childhood in rural Gloucestershire. So I guess it was quite an itinerant childhood, moving around the country with my father, who at that time was a salesman in an agricultural fertilizer company. So was moving around, handling different regions. I obviously, and my family, my brother and sister went with him and my mum. So landed up in Gloucester, which is where I did most of my TV viewing in the 1970s.
So what was it like in Gloucester at that time?
It was a rural upbringing. Most of my time was either, indoors watching television, and that really was my window on the world, raiding the fridge for Angel Delight and, grabbing a Coca-Cola flavoured soda stream drink to sit down to what was on at that particular time. It was a very happy time, simpler time. I remember things, as everyone does, about Christmas as well, being a magical time. Having the Evel Knievel toy. I was lucky to get one of those, and believe me, they were hard to come by.
I could never get one. It's that and Stretch Armstrong. I never had a Stretch Armstrong either.
Well, the Evel Knievel and what he could do, if you wound him up tight enough, was amazing. So, yeah, it was happy memories.
And you mentioned television. Obviously, that's part of what this podcast is about. What are your earliest memories of television?
I think based on what I've heard before, that chimes with me. I was thinking, though, the ones that were probably the most impressionable for me growing up were the live action series. And I guess that's just what I grew up preferring. So shows like, the double deckers, sitting in the old red London bus and using it as their den in an old, junkyard. That's where I wanted to be, with a gang of friends. Why Don't You was another one of the 70s. where we could all recite, the chime of "Why don't you just switch off your television set and go outside and do something less boring instead?" Those kind of live action shows were very meaningful, and I think more than anything, looking back, some of the black and white shows also instilled a foreign, an appreciation for foreign lands, and gave me, that first kind of insight into what it would be like, living somewhere else, or hearing different accents, or what traveling would look like in the wider world. There are 3 shows which really did that for me. The first of which was Belle and Sebastian, which was only 13 episodes made, but had these gorgeous black and white sequences of the mountains in the French Alps, which instilled in me a love of the mountains, which really never left. The French accents, so different. The soft focus in the way that it was shot. A lot of knitwear, I remember, a lot of scarves and funny jumpers. The White Horses was very similar as well. And I was very captured by the theme music, as I think many people were. Many people can recite, the theme tune.
Oh, that's lovely, lovely memories. And the theme tune to White Horses, I remember that very well. La 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 da 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 da. I've no idea what happened in any of the episodes.
No, I know none of the storylines. I can picture the girl and her uncle who ran the stud farm. I did pull out the lyrics though to White Horses. If you want to hear those, because these will take you back.
Absolutely.
And you'll hear the theme tune in your head as I'm saying them. Hopefully, on white horses, let me ride away to my world of dreams so far away. Let me run to the sun. So when I can only see the grey of a sad and very lonely day, that's when I softly sigh. On white horses, snowy white horses, let me ride away. It's great.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. As I say, I can imagine all of our listeners, the tune will be going through their heads now, probably for the rest of the day.
Yeah, probably best I don't sing it.
Are there any other programs that stick in your mind?
Well, just on the theme of black and white and foreign and great theme music as well, is Champion the Wonder Horse. That again, American programming. When you look at what we were watching when we were very young, American programming wasn't a big part of that for me. So I guess shows like Champion first introduced me to the big vistas of the American West, big skies, big mountain ranges. Again, not really following the storylines that much, but my goodness me, every time the theme music came on and you saw Champion thundering across the savannah, it was something that I always tuned into. That again was a great show with a great theme tune. I've got here as well if you want to hear it.
Go on.
Now you'll hear again the music in your head, like a streak of lightning flashing across the sky, like the swiftest arrow whizzing from a bow, like a mighty cannonball he seems to fly. You'll hear about him everywhere you go. The time will come when everyone will know the name of
Champion, the Wonder Horse. Yeah, that's interesting. I remember Champion the Wonder Horse vividly. Didn't Ricky live with Uncle Sandy, who was a rancher or something like that? And he had a dog, Rebel the dog, as well.
Rebel, yes, that's right, yes. Which is odd, in the same way that Belle was with, he was an orphan as well, so he wasn't living with his parents either in that show.
That's very interesting.
Belle was a big fluffy white dog as well, which I remember from my time in my parents' living room. We had this really fluffy white, probably in the 70s, polyester type fake fur rug. And so every time I saw Belle appearing on the screen, I would kind of like jump on the rug and it would like be giving Belle a good hug, So there was that immediate visceral connection with the.
Oh, that's a lovely memory. A lovely memory. Now, today we're talking about sport in the 1970s, because sport became an obsession for me at a reasonably young age, probably the mid-70s. I started going to watch football at a fairly young age, started watching it on television. I had Shoot magazine every week, and every Saturday night I'd try and update my league ladders, if you remember those, to try and reflect what had happened to all the football teams in the 4 divisions and all the leagues in Scotland as well. Now, my research team, i.e. me with Google, I've been doing a bit of research, and I think you are you're a sports media executive in your real life.
Yes, I am. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Marvellous. So eminently qualified to give us your views on sport in the 1970s. What do you remember about watching sport on television as a child?
I think the 1970s was an amazing time for a lot of the sports that I was actually interested in. I was a big follower as well of football, also rugby, cricket, tennis and golf. And you can make a case that the 1970s in a number of those sports has some of the greatest moments. I mean, you can think of one of the most exciting periods other than today with great, Federer, Nadal and Djokovic. You look at Borg, Connors and McEnroe in that 70s, early 80s,
Yes.
being the greatest before. I think in golf as well, the duel in the sun in Turnberry in 1977 between Tom Watson and Jack Nicklaus is generally acknowledged as one of the greatest golf majors of all time. And then Seve Ballesteros, winning at Lytham a couple of years later, announced his entry onto the global stage. Then you look at rugby and you look at the 1973, All Blacks versus Barbars, acknowledged, to be one of the greatest, if not the greatest, rugby match of all time, with Gareth Edwards and Phil Bennett doing their thing.
Marvellous.
Yeah, I mean, that must have inspired me and made me much more enthusiastic to get out there and play sports, in seeing some of the action on the screen. I was born in Liverpool, so I ended up being a Liverpool fan because they were so good in that era. I remember vividly them winning the FA Cup, which, as you'll remember from a TV perspective, was broadcast all day.
Yes, great memories of that.
Yeah, following the teams in the buses and having access to the players and coaches. And Liverpool beating Newcastle 3-0 in 1974 was a very vivid memory within that team of Keegan and Toshak. And
strange enough, I have happy memories of 1977 when Manchester United beat Liverpool 2-1 with similar personnel. But anyway, that's my personal preference.
Or there was one of the greatest FA Cups of all time in 1979 when Arsenal beat Man United 3.
Yes.
With 3
yes, I
coming in the last 5 minutes.
Yeah, I do remember that. I wish I didn't, but I do. No, FA Cup final day. I always remember that because they used to have things like themed It's a Knockout and themed programmes with supporters of each side on. But I think one of the things that really strikes me from today, that was one of the only times in the whole year we had live football on television.
Well, certainly for that length of time, yeah. I mean, we always had Jimmy Hill and the like on Match of the Day. I think you might be right. There weren't any live games other than those big FA Cup occasions. There were very limited opportunities for us to see all of the players in their very tight, very high up shorts in those days.
I mean, it was a big national event. And Ross, you mentioned rugby. What are your memories of rugby on television during the 1970s?
I remember very clearly Rugby Special, which was kind of my entry point to whatever was going on in the world of rugby, where you had Nigel Starmer-Smith, who was the lead anchor, I think, of the show. But then you generally had the dulcet tones of Bill McLaren commentating. The way that he was able to relate a game and make it interesting was second to none. I've mentioned the All Blacks and the Barbars game of 1973 as being one of the all-time great. But the five nations throughout the 1970s was obviously a golden era for Welsh rugby, and I think very, very lucky as young kids to watch some of the greats of that team do their stuff. And there's one game in particular I remember, which was Scotland, which is my team, because both my parents are Scots, moved down south just after getting married. Scotland played Wales in 1975 to decide the Five Nations Championship at that time. And there were 104,000 people at Murrayfield to watch that, which I think is still the highest attendance at any Five or Six Nations game, and the second highest of all time worldwide in rugby. So they had this massive.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it was the huge open stand at Murrayfield at that time. Just the look of that on TV with the likes of Andy Irvine and Gareth Edwards coming up against each other in that game. That's a very clear memory for me, as well as Scotland winning 12-10 as well. That was a happy ending.
Well, that's obviously a very important thing to remember.
Yeah. So yeah, happy memories.
I mean, what other sports do you remember? I mean, you mentioned rugby and football. I mean, I remember spending a lot of time in school holidays watching cricket, because the empty hours of the BBCs always seemed to be filled with cricket of one kind or another. And I grew to love watching cricket firstly from watching on the television before watching in person.
Yeah, amazing for your younger listeners to hear about cricket being all day on BBC Two for all 5 days of a test match. Produced very simply, I might add, with one camera covering both ends of the pitch. Remember that?
Yes, I mean, I think there are some people watching cricket today who don't realise that there are actually two ends of the pitch.
The ground, yeah. We were very clear on that growing up. But yeah, I mean, cricket often used to frustrate my parents because I'd be sitting inside on a beautiful summer's day with the curtains closed inside watching Geoffrey Boycott trying to get the ball off the square and at least an hour before any runs were scored. I could take the learnings from the test matches with England, through that period, and then take them outside into the garden where we had a net, and I had a friend from down the road, and we used to play full-on test matches going through the whole batting order, whole Ashes series that used to take up most of our time when we weren't inside watching Geoffrey doing his stuff.
Oh, that's fantastic. What a lovely memory.
The memory I have is, it's not a TV memory, but listening to the radio and then seeing back the highlights of very important games like the Centenary Test in 1977, which was played when, Dennis Lilly was at his pomp, and Derek Randall, made 174 in that game. At the Melbourne Cricket Ground. Australia won that game by 45 runs, and it ended up being the same result as for the very first Test match played years before.
Absolutely incredible. I've got goose pimples on my arm thinking about that. But it was great. I mean, I used to, when England were playing in Australia or India, it's, again, hard for some of our younger audience to realise, we had very, very little in the way of television coming from overseas cricket. So you had to listen to sometimes dodgy phone lines from India on the radio that used to go down every now and again. So very, very different to how sports presented today. I mean, given your experiences in sports media, what do you think are other big differences between what happens with sport now as to what happened then?
Wow. I mean, it feels as though everything has changed, really. Just not just the obvious point that there are more cameras and there is better coverage of the play. Looking at cricket from within the stumps themselves, or immediately. But also, there's just so much greater effort now by the teams producing the live sport content around support programming, seeing what the players are doing in the run up to the games, the whole analysis of what is going on during the game with enhanced graphics and player tracking data. None of that was available. None of that kind of enriched view on the sporting action was available in times. The commentary teams during the 70s did an incredible job just, making the action as magical as they could just through words. So they really had to focus and carry the show themselves in a way that now there's a lot more support programming and analysis and tools that they can use to relay, the action and make it interesting. We were being broadcast to in the 70s, and there wasn't much avenue for us to send in any messages or send in any tweets or the like. So that the two-way relationship between broadcaster and audience is now a big part of how sport is produced. Rightly so. And then lastly, I guess on this theme of everything changing, that even includes things like sponsorship. Brands that used to be like Watney's Red Bull and the local builders, on the sponsorship at Lords is now major corporate involvement and a lot more money in the game, not just through sponsorship but through media rights and ticketing and hospitality. So Yeah, I'd answer very simply that I think everything's changed in the coverage. A lot of it for the better, but I think I still rate the commentators of the 70s very high against the current selection as well.
Oh, that's really interesting. I mean, I think I tend to agree. In terms of the user experience, as I do, I sit at home watching sport on a huge screen in high definition. You get far better view than actually being in a football match or a cricket match than you would do. But I can't help feeling we've lost a little bit of something in terms of the quality, as you say, of some of the commentary, the sort of almost the journalism that was used to interpret what was going on and to help us understand the game better. I think probably the other thing I regret a little is that the trade-off for having such great coverage is that there are far fewer sporting events that are free to air. So the generations are missing out on watching cricket. Yeah, but it's, as you say, very different. I think everything has changed.
Yeah, it's a very difficult balance between generating enough money for the game and to support the ecosystem of a sport versus making it available to everyone.
It certainly is. And I'm not sure we're going to have the answers to that just in our conversation today. But it's fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, thanks for sharing your memories with us, Ross. Really, really interesting stuff. Any other final memories you'd like to share with our listeners?
Sport, you can't really leave that subject without mentioning the Olympics. I think, we were lucky. We were lucky in the 70s to have the 1976 Montreal Olympics, where there was a guy called Alberto Juantorenaand who was the only ever winner of the gold in the 400 and the 800. Look at the old footage of him running. He's still got the biggest stride of any athlete. And also you had Innsbruck as well, because the Summer and the Winter Olympics were in the same year in 1976.
Of course, yes. Yeah.
That was the time where, as a 10-year-old boy, I watched Franz Klammerat like a madman coming down the hills around Innsbruck, which was a thrill to see a guy like that going so fast on a pair of skis, looking so out of control at the same time, but winning the gold medal anyway.
Great. Lovely memories there.
Yeah, so I think the 70s was a golden era for many. When you recite back some of the things that happened during those 10 years, oftentimes it's seen as a decade of tough social issues and simpler times, but actually the sporting action that's there is still very, very highly prized in terms of the all-time best moments to this day.
I think that's absolutely right. And it's maybe partly that we remember this so fondly because things in the country were a little bit grim at that point, and sport provided a great option. So, I remember 1977 England winning the Ashes. What a great celebration there was for that. Well, thanks, Ross. It's been great to have you on My 70s TV Childhood, and thanks ever so much for sharing your memories with us.
You're very welcome. It's great to have had the time, Oliver, and I wish you every success with the podcast going forward. I'll certainly be tuning in.
Some lovely memories there, and a real reminder of how much sport and the way we watch it has changed since our childhoods. Sport has a real ability to inspire passion, emotion, and a feeling of belonging, as it always has. I only hope that current issues with sport do not lead to its decline. There's lots we haven't covered today. Saturday afternoon programming with Grandstand on BBC One and World of Sport on ITV. Did you watch the wrestling, or did you prefer watching the more grown-up sports on Grandstand? There's also surely an episode to come on Match of the Day and its regional equivalents like The Big Match in London, Star Soccer with Hugh Johns in the Midlands, and Kickoff in my own Granada land. Let me know what you'd like to see in future episodes and what you'd like to discuss on sport, and share your sporting memories with me at www.my70stvchildhood.com. Tweet me at 70schildhood or email me, oliver@my70stvchildhood.com. Well, that's all for now. Thanks again to our guest Ross for sharing his memories, and thank you for joining us, and see you again soon at My 70s TV Childhood. If you've enjoyed listening and want to support the show, you can do so by visiting my Patreon site at www.patreon.com/Oliver Colling, where you will find details of our membership tiers. For £2 a month, you can join the Tufty Club, get a shout out on a future episode, and learn how to cross the road safely, even when your mummy and daddy aren't there. Or for £5 a month, you can be a Blue Peter Badge member, and as well as getting a shout out, you can be my guest on a future episode, and also stroke Petra, Patch, Shep, Jason, and Goldie, and also see Frida the Tortoise's hibernation box. All memberships are totally flexible and can be cancelled at any time. My sincere thanks for your support.